Hello there.
Maiyegun
We are starting the reading of this book, and it is the book that tells the stories, the history of how Africans and African independence was rigged. And when the British, French, and the rest of them are trying to salvage whatever was left of those colonies that were getting independence, American CIA wouldn't let that continent, America government generally, wouldn't let that continent, Africa, attain any superpower to the point of challenging their once upon a time colonial masters. So it's rich. So we're going to do like 2 hours, okay? We do 2 hours and we see how that goes. And then maybe it's something we'll do for the rest of the week as well. It is 500, it is 500 and, let's see, 23 pages. And how many chapters? Anyway, without wasting much time, I will start the reading. And I will be taking breaks every half an hour just to have my tea break. Kind of chat a bit about whatever is discovered. So ladies and gentlemen, brethren in the temple, thank you so much for joining me from wherever you are joining at this moment. Please share the broadcast. Invite your friends, invite your not so friendly friends. Tell them that we have started another history class. And you can listen to this broadcast like you are listening to a podcast. If you have something you have to do this morning, listen, if it is morning for you, if it is afternoon, depends, right? You can still get on with your daily business, okay? And if you have enough time to sit and watch and engage, that would be great. So please let me know if the reading tempo is fine. I will read the comment though, okay? So please share this. Like I said, invite your friends, invite your not so friendly friends. Usually we don't have so many people, watching live. Majority of our viewers are going to possibly see this later. But if you happen to be here now, share the broadcast. So we are starting now, and it's going to be part 1. White Malice, the CIA and the neocolonization of Africa. So this one goes beyond just Nigeria now and all of the interested parties. This is Africa as a whole. So it's like widening your horizon. You can get a copy of the book. It's written by Susan Williams. Right. To those who have possibly read this book, it's a pleasure that you can possibly just listen and tell us how that feels. Okay, when some of your favorite lines or the memory that you possibly, or the lessons or whatever you learned from the book, that once the lines are coming out the way you feel, you can share that too. So let's get started. So part 1, freedom at night. The hours of the day had been hot and charged with thunder. As darkness fell, the humid atmosphere in Africa felt explosive. Even so, the crowds had swallowed along the coast, and the streets were even. Suddenly, the newly built Ark of Independence was floodlit against the blackness of the sea. The monument was inscribed with a short but powerful message: freedom and justice, AD 1957. It stood on the spot where 3 unarmed men had been shot dead 9 years earlier, when a British police officer had ordered his men to fire at a peaceful deputation from the African Ex-Servicemen's Union. Now it marked the start of a new era. Fireworks soared into the sky above the Ark. In the strength of midnight, bells pealed loudly. Then the Union Jack flying above Parliament House was hauled down, and the new flag of Ghana was solemnly raised up for the first time. As it reached the top of the pole, it fluttered slowly in the night air, red, gold, and green, with the black lodestar of Africa at its center. Cries of happiness rang out, and people danced and sang in jubilation. Over and over, people cheered and shouted out at the top of their voices, "Freedom, Ghana, Nkrumah." Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah was carried shoulder high to a dais in the old polo ground, close to the roaring surf of the Atlantic Ocean. Under a flood of light, Nkrumah's open face and large, steady eyes looked out at the thousands in front of him. 48 years old, he had spent much of his life working for this moment, as had so many others. He wore a cotton smock from the north of Ghana and a Gandhi-type prison cap marked with the initials PG, standing for prison graduate. It was a badge of honor, worn with pride by many Ghanaians in remembrance of their unjust imprisonment by the British. The noise of the crowd was deafening. Then Dr. Nkrumah held out his arm to command attention. With solemn authority, he called for a minute's silence to give thanks to God. Then he asked everyone to remove their hats as the police band played the new national anthem, "Ghana Arise." Tears streamed down his face, and many in the crowd were sobbing. Unmistakably, on the 6th of March, 1957, the people of Ghana were free. The British colony of the Gold Coast was no more, and Ghana had become the first Black majority country to obtain independence from a colonialism, blazing a trail for the African continent. At long last, proclaimed Nkrumah, the battle has ended, and Ghana, our beloved country, is free forever. Then, choked with emotions, he fell silent. It was an unforgettable moment for Cameron Dudu, a young cub reporter. Just 16 words, no more. He wrote later, but no one who heard them would ever be able to forget them. The cheers that greeted those 16 words were, of course, out of this world. The iconography of Ghana's independence ceremony followed the pattern set by India on 15th August 1947, 10 years earlier. Then, too, the Union Jack had been lowered and replaced by the new Indian flag at midnight. But Ghana was not copying India for dramatic effect. It was following India's clear commitment to international non-alignment, led by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. The commitment had been a major theme of the Bandung Conference of African Asian States in 1955, in which the Gold Coast participated. They are led by Nehru, Indonesia's Sukarno, and Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. 29 emergent nations across Africa and Asia had sought to lay the foundations of a non-aligned third force to resist the pressure from the West and from the East in the context of the Cold War. Not only in Ghana's capital Accra, but also in Kumasi, Tamale, Sekondi Takoradi, and Cape Coast. Similar ceremonies took place where the Union Jack was replaced with the new flag. Families in the churches and the mosques sent prayers to God. In the nightclubs, exuberant throngs danced to the high life, a popular fusion of Ghanaian musical traditions with Western instruments. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta, I'll take that again. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King, who had come from America to celebrate Ghana's freedom, were a part of the crowd in Accra. These young civil rights campaigners, Dr. King was just 28 years old, were profoundly moved. Before I knew it, declared Dr. King in a sermon the following month to his congregation in Montgomery, Alabama, I started weeping. I was crying for joy. And I knew about all of the struggles and all of the pain and all of the agony that these people had gone through for this moment. At the opening of the first session of the Parliament of Ghana, Sir Charles Arden Clark was sworn in as Governor General, as the representative of the British Crown. Before independence, he had been the governor representing not only Queen Elizabeth II, but the powers of the British government in his colonial territory. He made a brief personal statement in which he declared his unqualified pride at his association with colonialism and referred to the continuity of purpose of British colonial policy. Britain's High Commissioner, who attended the session, reported to London that he delivered this statement with a smile, which evoked an appreciative response from members of parliament. No doubt, Ghana's MPs felt obliged to be polite to their guests, but it was a strange thing to say, since the struggle against colonialism had been fierce, against, as Nkrumah put it, the limitations on our freedom, the crimes against our dignity as human beings. It was true that in comparison with many other territories in Africa occupied by European powers, Ghana had escaped the large invasion of white settlers, which had wrecked the lives of so many millions of people in territories such as Kenya, South Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa. But there were profound and brutal forms of injustice in Ghana under British rule. 7 hospitals in the country catered for fewer than 3,000 Europeans. The colonizers warred for any person with white skin, leaving 36 hospitals for about 4 million Ghanaians. This inequality based on skin color was mirrored in all public services, including education. It was also, manifest in the crude physical segregation of people. When I first went to the Gold Coast, recalled Erica Powell, who went to work for Sir Charles Arden Clark as his private secretary in 1952, there existed between the so-called elites of the Europeans and the Africans in whose country they lived a racial barrier as apparent as the Mason-Dixon line. She was shocked at the racism of most whites, who were unanimous in declaring that the Africans were nowhere near being capable of taking over the government of the country. Powell was among those impressed by Nkrumah's charisma and magnetism. They slowly became friends, and she learned from him a different way of looking at colonization, which challenged her assumption that British rule was benevolent and had brought some kind of superior civilization. One day, when she expressed ignorance of what self-government meant, Nkrumah spent more than 2 hours explaining it to her. I was held spellbound, at times horrified by what he had to say, wrote Powell years later. It was not a sob story, he said, but a lesson in colonial history, politics, and economics, which shattered into tiny little pieces my schoolgirl illusions about Britain's big-hearted give all and take not attitude towards our colonies. At the end, he could find nothing worthwhile to justify Britain's presence in Africa. Because of her friendship with Nkrumah, Powell was ostracized by the British community and was asked by the governor to leave the colony. Instead, he left the colonial service. In 1955, he became Nkrumah's devoted and loyal private secretary, who was as much concerned by what he ate and didn't eat as by his files and appointments. As hardworking and conscientious woman who wore plain clothes and a tiny hairstyle, he was thoroughly professional in affects. Nonetheless, many of the British expatriate community regarded her as the Jezebel of Africa, Jezebel of Accra. They spread prurient rumors that reflected their loathing of interracial relationships. There was no evidence to suggest that Powell and Nkrumah were having a sexual relationship. Nkrumah had a number of friendships with women rooted in shared intellectual and political interests, as well as companionship. On the last day of 1957, Nkrumah married Fathia Alim Rizk, a 25-year-old Egyptian. Rizk, a former student at the University of Cairo, was a quiet and dignified woman with dark eyes and a bright smile. When she agreed to the marriage, he had not met Nkrumah. nor had she been to Ghana. She had been identified as a possible wife by a friend of Nkrumah's, and they were shown photographs of each other. That's like today's internet, what do you call it? Dating website, where you can just see the picture of somebody you like and you message them and they agree to be your girl. So these guys actually tried that in 1957. Write that down. So anyway, President Nasir met with risk before the marriage. He was not against the plan, he said, but wanted her to be aware of the challenges ahead. Her response was adamant. I would like to go and marry this anti-colonial leader. I read his autobiography. I know of his trials and tribulations, of his struggles during his student days in America and Britain, and of his spearheading the anti-colonial struggle upon his return to his homeland. For risk, Nkrumah was an anti-colonial hero like Nasir. He wished to make her own contribution to Africa's struggle for freedom. Their first child was born in 1959 and named Gamal after Nasir, the president of Egypt at the time. It was not meant to be a marriage made in heaven, commented Gamal Nkrumah when an adult. It was a political union between Mediterranean-oriented North Africa and the rest of the continent. The years leading up to Ghana's independence were a time of suffering and oppression. The killings in 1948 of 3 men of the African Ex-Servicemen's Union had triggered bitter and widespread violence, which transformed the political scene of the colony. The situation became so tense that in 1950, Governor Aden Clark declared a state of emergency and imposed a curfew, during which Nkrumah was arrested on the charge of inciting an unofficial strike. In 1951, large-scale elections to the Legislative Assembly took place. This produced a victory for the Convention People's Party, CPP, led by Nkrumah, which forced the colonial government to release him from prison. He was driven among cheering crowds to party headquarters, and the next day, he was invited by the governor to form a government. For the first time, Ghanaians had a majority in the assembly and in the executive council, but the ex-officio members nominated by Aden Clark held the real reins of power through their control of defense, external affairs, finance, and justice. This was a government largely in name, argued Nkrumah, with ultimate power residing in the governor of the Gold Coast, who really represented the colonial office on the spot. It was not until 1956 that a popular election was held in order to deliver a national government in which a majority of the seats were won by the Convention People's Party. As the outgoing power in 1957, the British selected many of the official guests to the independence celebration of Ghana. President Nasir, President of the United Arab Republic, a political union of Egypt and Syria that had been formed in 1958, was not invited because of the rupture in diplomatic relation between the UK and Egypt following the fiasco of the Suez crisis in 1956. The most important guest from the point of view of the British government was Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent, who came as the representative of Queen Elizabeth II. She presided over a busy royal program including a meeting at the race course, a popular event in colonial circles. Reports sent to London by British officials praised the Duchess. So it praised the Duchess's warm engagement with the celebration, as well as thoughts, culture, and glittering jewels. More than 50 foreign governments were invited and sent special representatives. Some 200 members of the press and media came to, in the words of one press officer, the world had come to Accra. The largest delegations came from the USSR, the US, and the People's Republic of China, which sent parties of 20 or more, creating logistical challenges for the new nation. The Ambassador Hotel, specially built for independence to offer modern and luxurious accommodations, was not very large and had to house all the important guests. The American delegation, led by Vice President Richard M. Nixon and his wife, Pat, and accompanied by a second plane packed with American newsmen, were put up in the Ambassador Hotel along with the Soviets. One headline in the US noted, Accra billets Nixon with red. At a state banquet, all was pomp and protocol, except that the sitting plan had been drawn up alphabetically. This meant that the leader of the Soviet delegation, the handsome I.A. Benediktov, Minister of State Farming, sat at the top table, and Vice President Nixon, because his name began with the letter N, was placed further down the room. Nixon was furious. Headlines in the US the following day made the most of it. Nixon slighted as Kwame. Sorry, he said Nixon slighted as Kwame head's table. Nixon slighted on trip. AIDS miffed. Nixon snub shows how little prestige US billions have brought. Headlines in America. A British official working for the Colonial Public Relations Service enjoyed his contact with the Russian journalists. At the airport, he found two solemn men standing smoking silently. The correspondent from Pravda gave him a Russian cigarette and introduced him to the cameraman. Back at the hotel, he recorded the two Russians became our politest guests. They sat in the lounge at night, dispensing Russian cigarettes and occasional shots of vodka that they had with them, and refused to be rattled by the political questions thrown at them by the other correspondents. The official observed with wry amusement that they filled long stories on the social and the economic aspect of life in Ghana, but seemed only slightly interested in what the Duchess of Kent was doing. Visiting African dignitaries included leaders such as Habib Bourguiba, the president of Tunisia, which had achieved independence from France in 1956, William Tolbert, the vice president of Liberia, Sylvanus Olympio from Togo, and the son of Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia. From France came the Minister of Justice, Francois Mitterrand, and from Vatican, Archbishop No. Dr. Ralph Bunche, senior advisor to Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General, was also present. Bonche, an American, had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his mediating role in the Arab-Israel War of 1948 to 1949, and was the first Black person ever to be honored in this way. At the time of Ghana's independence, Bonche was embroiled in the ongoing Suez problem and, exhausted by the pace and by constant bouts of dysentery, welcomed the respite offered by the visit to Ghana. He brought a special message from Ama's God, congratulating Ghana on becoming the 81st member of the United Nations. A large number of guests came at the personal invitation of Prime Minister Nkrumah. At the top of this list were George Padmore, the Trinidadian Pan-Africanist, and his wife, Dorothy Pizza. Firm friends of Nkrumah from his days in the UK. Their visions of the future of Africa merged perfectly with his. Not only free of colonial rule, but also not aligned to either the East or the West. We do not, stated Padmore family, intend to be like Russia, the United States, or anyone else. With open arms, Nkrumah invited freedom fighters from all over the world, such as Chedi Jagan from British Guiana and Norman Manley from British-ruled Jamaica. From South Africa came the Reverend Michael Scott, an Anglican priest, and the peace activist Homer Jack. From Kenya came Umbiyu Konange, a prominent member of the Kenya African Union and the brother-in-law of Jomo Kenyatta. Its leader, who was in prison serving a 7-year sentence handed down by the British colonial administrators for the alleged organization of the land and freedom movement, dubbed Mau Mau, the Mau Mau riots in Kenya. A lot of people were killed by British, administration, then colonial administration, for that uprising, anyway, by the colonizers. The British government were responsible in the 1950s for a terrible campaign of systemic and brutal torture and abuse, killing, castration, and rape of Kenyan freedom fighters. From the US came civil rights campaigners such as Dr. Martin Luther King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Asa Philip Randolph, and Adam Clayton Powell. Shirley Graham came without her 89-year-old husband, the renowned African-American scholar and founding father of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, that's the NAACP, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. He had been blocked from traveling abroad by the US government. Also from the US came distinguished academics, including Horace Mann Bond, the president of Lincoln University. Nkrumah had spent 10 years studying in the US, first at Lincoln University and then at the University of Pennsylvania. Nkrumah's landlady in London, Mrs. Florence Manley, came with her daughter. Mrs. Manley had supported Nkrumah's political work in London and had been mentioned in intelligence reports on Nkrumah by the spies and informers of the UK's special branch and MI5, who speculated, wrongly, that Nkrumah and Mrs. Manley were on intimate terms and planning to marry. Rumors about their alleged relationship were spread by the colonial government in 1948 in a deliberate effort to discredit him. They too were strange, prurient imaginings. Erica Powell was concerned that Nkrumah barely slept during the week of the independence celebrations. When he wasn't attending official functions or receiving foreign guests in private audience, he recorded, he was sought after by his own ministers, his party colleagues, and the masses of ordinary men and women. But our concern was unfounded, for no matter at what hour he met his guests, he was fresh, alert, dynamic, listening avidly to what each had to say and handling any subject with equal ability and enthusiasm. But one challenge almost defeated him. When told he was expected to lead the dancing at the State Hall, he was appalled, saying that he knew only the high life. He was rescued by Lucille Armstrong, who taught him the basic steps of the waltz, foxtrot, and quick step. He had met Mrs. Armstrong the year before when she had come to Ghana with her husband, Louis Armstrong, the famous American jazz trumpeter. Armstrong was unable to go back to Ghana to celebrate independence, but Lucille flew there with a copy of Satchmo the Great. A film showed Armstrong dedicating to Prime Minister Nkrumah the protest anthem from the 1920s, What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue, composed by jazz musician Fats Waller. The last lines of the song painfully and powerfully convey the injustice of discrimination against Black people because of the color of their, because of the color of their skin. My only sin, goes the song, is in my skin. One of its most heart-wrenching lines includes the words, wish I was dead. It asks, how would it end? Satchmo the Great captured Nkrumah's emotional response to the song as he listened intently to the words. The state balls during the independence celebration was a far more formal affair than the jazz concerts the previous year. One of the guests was Genoveva Marais, a South African woman in her 20s who had arrived in Ghana the month before to work as an inspector of schools. She was excited to be a fully fledged Black citizen in Ghana and no longer a victim of apartheid in her own country. Her father had felt great happiness at the independence of Ghana, and the thrill he felt, he wrote later in a memoir, was translated to me. When the invitation to the ball arrived, Marais was in the height of delight, beautiful, vivacious, and sophisticated. He was quickly noticed by Nkrumah, who sent an officer to request our company at his table. He had noticed Nkrumah's easy hair as he walked around the room, chatting with different people. But all the same, she felt dizzy and nervous. Her unease swiftly disappeared as they joked and laughed together. They had much in common. Marais, like Nkrumah, had studied in the US at Columbia University in New York. After her education at Fort Hare and Rhodes University in South Africa, She quickly sensed that Nkrumah was physically attracted to her, which was confirmed when the Prime Minister invited her to State House the following morning. Before long, he asked her to marry him, but she refused. She noted with approval that Nkrumah created a new dimension for African womanhood. There were even female members of the parliament and a judge, but she said, I was not ready for marriage, and I was far too critical and independent. This did not prevent the development of their relationship. Viva, as Nkrumah called Malace, believed that she learned to know and understand Kwame Nkrumah as no one else ever could. They became close companions, and it was widely rumored that she was his lover. As the Reverend Martin Luther King witnessed the birth of Ghana, he realized its wider significance. So, this event, he believed, will give impetus to oppressed peoples all over the world. I think it will have worldwide implications and repercussions, not only for Asia and Africa, but also for America. It renewed his conviction. He said in a radio interview in Accra, in the ultimate triumph of justice. And it seems to me that this is fit testimony to the fact that eventually the forces of justice triumph in the universe. And somehow the universe itself is on the side of freedom and justice. So that this gives new hope to me in the struggle for freedom. King. The independence celebrations led King to compare African liberation with African American civil rights struggles. At bottom, commented King, both segregation in America and colonialism in Africa are based on the same thing: white supremacy and contempt for life. King also met Vice President Nixon for the first time in Ghana. Back in America, Nixon, along with the US presidents, Dwight Eisenhower, had been asked by African Americans living in the southern states to visit them, to see for themselves the ugliness of Jim Crow and the laws enforcing racial segregation. The vice president had managed to evade those requests. But soon after arriving in Accra, King attended a reception where he encountered Nixon. He used it as an opportunity to press him to visit the South. Mr. Vice President, I'm glad to meet you here, King told Nixon. But I want you to come visit us down in Alabama, where we are seeking the same kind of freedom the Gold Coast is celebrating. Generally, Nixon was in his element on the trip. When he was met at the airport by a group of ministers, he cut away from the official party and headed for the airport fence. He had spotted a crowd lining the rails, and followed by his wife, he shook hands with everybody and parted heads. According to a press officer, he smiled all the time. The Ghanaian ministers themselves experienced politicians, watched Nixon's technique admiringly. While an American reporter commented dryly that Nixon was campaigning already for the forthcoming US election. Well, newsreel captured Nixon grinning broadly, and wielding his movie camera throughout the visit. Echoing the euphoria of his Ghanaian hosts, he went up to one man in jovial good humor. Slapping him on the shoulder, he asked him how it felt to be free. "I wouldn't know, sir," came the reply. "I am from Alabama." Wow. For Nkrumah, freedom for Ghana had a significance beyond even the liberation of the nation. He set this out clearly in his speech at the old polo ground. "Our independence," he insisted, "is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. Liberation would stretch from north to south. The Sahara no longer divides us," he said firmly. "It unites us." The only way forward for Africa, Nkrumah believed, was the creation of a federation of nations, a United States of Africa. He was applying the lessons of freedom from the history of America, where 13 colonies had revolted in 1776 against the British, and together had issued the Declaration of Independence. The colonies formed a union, eventually constituting the 50 states of the United States of America. Nkrumah wanted Africa to achieve the same union of states, declared his friend and disciple Kofi Batsa, a Ghanaian political activist. The states would aim to serve each other with all the necessary economic conditions of labor, of skills, of capital, of minerals, of energy reserves, to provide a self-contained and self-development economy. Within Africa, added Batsa, Nkrumah saw there were enormous skills, enormous assets, and great potential to achieve this vision. African unity, therefore, was the strategy of the total liberation and complete independence of Africa. It was a bold, visionary goal, full of idealism and pragmatism. So that is the end of part 1, chapter 1. And that took us about 48 minutes, right? Reading can be so long. So we've covered about 14 pages so far. So we're going to go to chapter 2 after this, my tea break, right? So give me a sec. Anyway, thank you. So again, we are not really that many. So therefore, those of you who are here, do your best and then share this. Share it. Because so many people will probably come around and then watch this or listen to it and maybe go get a book too. Right? So thank you so much, I know, USA. That was Nkrumah's vision. Like so many of those guys back then, they were younger, maybe not too young, but they were younger, and they had this vision that ordinarily was believed to be a threat, a future threat to America, to the West, to Britain, and the rest of the colonial masters. So this is how they now had to do their best, okay? Number one, to underdevelop Africa and kill some of these Pan-Africanists who have this vision of possibly creating the United States of Africa back then, which could have made us stronger. And we wouldn't even need to, we can just drive, you can drive, or you can just go buy ticket and fly from, from Ghana to South Africa, from South Africa to Egypt, from Egypt to anywhere in Africa, you can drive, but they decided, in Europe, okay, in America, when they all came together, the colonies came together to form the United States of America and push for independence. They bonded, they remained together, right? And they ensured that Britain never had they never have to lord over them anymore, okay? Now, in Europe, where some of the colonizers came from, right? They do not have any border, so to say. Like they have made us exist in Africa, right? But this is kind of the foundation of how they killed or ensured that the vision for some of these supposed African countries never really materialized at all. Let's go to chapter 2. My home is over Jordan. So Nkrumah had been a student in America for 10 years. Between 1935 and 1945, his experience had a profound influence on the development of his thinking and his politics. But it came from a poor family. Hang on, I think I'll take that line again. It says, but it is extraordinary that he went to the US at all. For one thing, he came from a poor family. His father, a goldsmith, had died when he was 17. His mother, Elizabeth Unyaneba, with whom he had lived as a child in the village of Nkrumah in Unzima in the extreme southwest of the Gold Coast, was a local trader in cigarettes and rice. He left his homestead with very little money and knew that he would suffer hardship. It was also painful to go so far away from his mother, especially as he was her only child. It cannot be helped, she said, may God and your ancestors guide you. Most Ghanaians hoping to study abroad looked to British universities, especially if they wished to establish themselves in a profession such as law. But Nkrumah was different. His aim was not to secure a career, but to find a way of ending the colonization of the Gold Coast. He was therefore inspired by the speeches and newspaper articles of Nnamdi Azikiwe, a Nigerian nationalist who had recently returned to Africa from his studies in the US. Azikiwe went on to become the first president of Nigeria in 1963. In the 1930s, he fired the imaginations of those who longed for freedom from the European colonizers. He urged African intellectuals to go to the US and to come back with the golden fleece. Nkrumah was among the first to take Azikiwe's advice. After boarding ship to the US, Nkrumah felt desperately alone and Nkrumah said he felt desperately alone and sat on my bunk close to tears. But beside him, he found a telegram from Azikiwe. Goodbye. Remember to trust in God and in yourself. This gave him the courage he needed to face the journey. Once he had arrived in the US, Nkrumah managed to enroll at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Lincoln, the alma mater of Azikiwe, was widely regarded as the Princeton of African American universities. In 1884, it had become the first institution anywhere in the world to grant degrees to Black students. At Lincoln, Nkrumah soared through examinations, notes his biographer, Basil Davidson. He earned both a Bachelor's of Arts in 1939 and a Bachelor of Theology in 1942. When he graduated at the top of his class, then again, following in the path of Azikiwe, he went to the University of Pennsylvania, where he obtained 2 MA degrees. In 1945, Nkrumah attracted the attention of the FBI, which sent a special agent to investigate his behavior on campus. The agent reported that while the subject had lacked leadership on the campus and had not shown initiative, he was considered loyal and honest. He knew of no radical tendencies on the part of the subject. Nkrumah was not an independent thinker, added the agent. Judging by his several reports on Nkrumah, the FBI gained no real sense at that time of the man who would lead a nation to freedom and take a key role on the world stage. Nkrumah learned the art of preaching in the US and on many Sundays gave sermons at Baptist and Presbyterian churches in Philadelphia and in New York. When he preached, it was about Africa. He was a good but quiet speaker, according to one source. Nkrumah was an intellectual of the first order. He read and studied incessantly, but he learned as much from the struggles of American daily life. He believed as he did at institutions or libraries. These struggles included poverty and hunger. Though his way of life was simple and abstemious, he was also teetotal and did not smoke. He found it difficult to get by. He relied for survival on menial jobs, such as selling fish from a cart in Harlem, in New York City. For a period, he worked from midnight to 8 a.m. in all weathers in a shipbuilding yard in Pennsylvania. When not living in university accommodation, he found it hard at times to find lodgings available to non-whites and was forced to sleep on a park bench or in a doorway. In New York, he sometimes bought a subway ticket and spent the whole night traveling back and forth between Brooklyn and Harlem. He also suffered the brutal injustice of racism. In his autobiography, published in 1957, the chapter on his years in America is titled Hard Times. He described a journey by bus involving a stop in Baltimore. In the refreshment room at the bus terminal, Nkrumah asked the white waiter for a drink of water. So Nkrumah wrote, "He frowned and looked down his nose at me as if I was something unclean. 'The place for you, my man, is the spittoon outside,' he declared as he dismissed me from his side. I was so shocked that I could not move. I just stood and stared at him." Nkrumah had already experienced racial segregation in American buses and restaurants and other public places. But he said, "I could not bring myself to believe that one could refuse a man a drink of water because his skin happened to be a different color." A similar racist insult was suffered in the US by Kamala A. Bedema, the waitress at a Howard Johnson's restaurant in Delaware, refused to seat him in the restaurant because colored people are not allowed to eat in there. Bedema, who had entertained Vice President Nixon earlier that year was outraged. If the Vice President of the United States can have a meal in my house when he is in Ghana, said Bedema, then I cannot understand why I must receive this treatment at a roadside restaurant in America. Bedema gave a report of the event to the press, and the episode came to the attention of President Eisenhower, who issued an official apology. I believe the United States as a government, if it is going to be true to its founding documents, said Eisenhower, does have the job of working hard toward that time when there is no discrimination made on such inconsequential reason as race, color, or religion. I love that. People who kind of like, stand their ground and all of that, and they will never be told off without them standing their ground. I love that. So let's proceed from the American president anyway. So Eisenhower invited Bedema to breakfast with himself and Nixon at the White House, demonstrating his readiness to sit at table with a person who was Black. Meanwhile, the executives at Howard Johnson's gave new instructions to the Delaware restaurant doors. Bedema, by calling out the moral wrong of American segregation, had contributed in a powerful and public way to the civil rights movement. In July 1958, Dr. Nkrumah returned to America. Influential figures were eager to meet the rising star of West Africa, including Eisenhower, who hosted a luncheon for him in Washington. It was a stark contrast to his first years in the country. An important stop on his 1958 tour was Harlem, where he had spent his summers as a student, looking for work in the day and sleeping in the subway at night. Here, at a packed reception, Ralph Bunche spoke of Ghana's independence a year earlier, setting out the significance of Nkrumah's achievements for African Americans. We salute you, Kwame Nkrumah, not only because you are the Prime Minister of Ghana. We salute you because you are a true and living representation of our best hopes and ideals, of the determination we have to be accepted fully as equal beings, of the pride we have held and nurtured in our African origin. Bunche added with emphasis, but above all, Mr. Prime Minister, we embrace you because you and your people and we are brothers, brothers of the skin and beneath the skin. On the evening following the Harlem reception, African American organizations, including NAACP, sponsored a huge dinner in Nkrumah's honor at the Waldorf Astoria with 1,000 guests. Nkrumah took this opportunity to invite interested and qualified Americans to come to Ghana as teachers and technicians. Before leaving US, Nkrumah flew to Chicago. His secretary, Erica Powell, who was traveling with him, was astonished to see that practically the whole of the route from the airport to the center of town was lined with African Americans. It was like being back in Africa. He recorded in a memoir, the reception the Black community gave to Nkrumah, she said, was truly from their hearts. Many of them, particularly the older ones, were unashamedly weeping. Others stood as if stunned, unable to believe in miracles, that they would ever live to witness such honor bestowed. on one of their own color. Wow, that kind of make me a little bit teary, because somehow I'm kind of imagining some of these scenarios of that era. Like you are a black person, okay, but you are not treated as human being, right? And you existed that way. Then, reading this and then, all this that happened, right? I could just imagine, and it kind of make me teary, sincerely. Like, what kind of racism existed back then that you are a black person? The moment you realize you are like automatically just know that you are nothing, you are unclean, you are worthless, and you are treated as such. And then you are living to witness where a black man who have also experienced same in that same place is not being so honored. And you have been told that that's going to happen. As a black man, you're going to be free. Like this freedom we talk about, today, some people believe that we've taken some of these things for granted, okay? Imagine living like a slave, enough that you have no real rights. Whether you are African American or you are from Africa who went to America, you will be treated same way. I mean, and then people lived and died too. They actually like died. Never to, well, let's continue. Anyway, among the weeping citizens who lined the streets to welcome Nkrumah to Chicago were many with a direct link with Africa. They were descended from ancestors taken forcibly as slaves from its shores. The link was officially remembered in the year of return in 2019, when the state of Ghana invited the global African family, home and abroad, to mark 400 years of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in Jamestown, Virginia. The year of return was organized to mark the cumulative resilience of all the victims of the Atlantic slave trade. It was followed by Beyond the Return, a 10-year project directed at people of African descent, wherever they may currently be living. In the 15th century, Portuguese trader had gone to West Africa to tap into the systems of mining and trading gold that were deeply entrenched in the region. Explains K. James Myers, a historian of African and the diaspora. But by the 16th century, the greed had shifted to a trade in human beings. Thus began the savage removal of people from Africa to North America, South America, and the Caribbean. A small percentage of people were taken to Europe or other locations, including the Atlantic islands, such as Madeira and the Canaries. The profit to be made from the sale of human life brought in traders from other nations too. British, French, Dutch, Spanish, Danish, Swedish, German, and in due course, Americans. It has been extremely difficult to collect accurate data regarding the numbers of men, women, and children who were possibly carried away from Africa in the long centuries of the Atlantic slave trade. However, recent authoritative research for a major database estimates that more than 12.5 million captive individuals were forced to leave Africa between 1501 and 1875. Nearly 2 million of those people were estimated to have perished during the horrors of the journeys. Many died through disease or ill treatments, and others in despair of defiance, jumped overboard. This crossing is often referred to as the Middle Passage, on the grounds that it was the middle leg of a triangular route from Europe to Africa, with goods that would be sold in return for captured people, then to the Americas to sell the captives and buy sugar, tobacco, and other produce, and finally back to Europe before embarking on yet another triangular voyage. However, voyages frequently did not follow the triangular pattern, especially in the South Atlantic. For instance, journey from Brazil to Africa and then back were common. Close to 11 million people disembarked on the Americas to be sold into slavery. Often, Mayas states, people were disembarked only to be reshipped to another location. Frequently, there were multiple legs and sails in these journeys. At the time of sail, it was common for children to be taken away from their parents and for members of partnered couples to be separated from each other and never to see each other again. Portugal, Brazil, and Britain accounted for about 70% of all Africans transported to the Americas. Portuguese and from a later date, Brazilian vessels between 1501 and 1875 carried nearly 6 million people. Vessels from England from 1603, Great Britain between 1551 and 1825 carried well over 3 million people. The earliest known slave voyage direct from Africa to the Americas sailed in 1525. It left with an estimated 359 slaves and lost 72 of them to death, arriving finally with 287. In 1776, the year of the US Declaration of Independence, nearly 90,000 people were taken from Africa, and nearly 80,000 people arrived. Those who were taken to the US did not benefit from the best known words of the Declaration. We hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The principal author of the Declaration was Thomas Jefferson, who owned over 100 slaves in 1776. Jefferson subsequently served as the third president of the United States. The lives of the enslaved people were brutal, punitive, and pitiless, working from sun up to sun down in plantations, farms, and domestic homes with inadequate food and the lash of the whip. Slaveholders had the right to rape the women they owned. In 1807, President Jefferson signed into law an act prohibiting the importation of African slaves into the US. In the same year, the British Parliament banned the involvement of Britons in the slave trade. At the start of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation became law, freeing some 3 million enslaved people. But the practice of chattel slavery was not abolished officially in the US until 1865, at the end of the Civil War, with the passage of the 13th Amendment. Even now, the process of abolition is not complete. Slavery as a punishment for crimes is still legal in the US under the terms of that same amendment. Slavery went on long after 1865, as did the trade. American ships flying false flags and fitted out as slavers were soon found at Cape Coast Castle in what is now Ghana. The historian William St. Clair, in 1881, he adds, an American slaving vessel was discovered, allegedly from Brazil, calling itself provocatively by the contemptuous racist Americanism, the Spade. To facilitate the transatlantic slave trade, more than 50 castles and forts were built along the 260 miles of the Gold Coast by the various slave trading nations. Through this bleak fortification, past people captured within what is now Ghana and in surrounding territories. An important center was Christiansborg Castle in what is now Accra, which juts out from a rocky cliff overhanging the sea, about 1.5 miles along the coast from the old polo ground. The castle was built from stone brought from Denmark, with carved stone crowns and inscriptions celebrating the kings who lived in the original Christiansborg Castle in Copenhagen. White vast, standing at the edge of the Atlantic, observed the African-American writer Richard Wright, the grandson of slaves who visited the Gold Coast in 1953. It dominates the topic. It dominates the tropic, sandy, palm tree landscape. The fetid, dark dungeons where the slaves were kept lie in the depths of the castle. Downwinding, narrow steps, men and women were kept in separate spaces. When the time came for their enforced departure from their land, the slaves were led in chains through the door of no return, which opened onto the white sand of the beach, facing the green-blue waves. Small boats took them to the horror of the slave ships. Wright, sticking by his visit to the castle, imagine the seizing of a woman's arm as she was led toward those narrow, dank steps that guided her to the tunnel that directed her feet to the waiting ship that would bear her across the heaving, mist-shrouded Atlantic. Yet further horrors awaited her, the terrible journey, and then, if she survived, to be sold into a life of total servitude. No one will ever know the number or identity of the Black men, women, and children who passed through these wars, noted Wright. Sadly, recent research does include information about Christiansborg Castle, but it should be regarded as a bare minimum because of the problem of undocumented voyages, for which the data are missing altogether. Bearing that absence in mind, it appears that Christiansborg Castle is likely to have housed most of the slaves in voyages that, at a minimum, took away over 16,084 people. Of these individuals, it can be estimated, given the pattern of loss at sea on the slave voyages, that over 3,000 people perished at sea, and that about 13,000 reached the ship's destinations in the Americas. The number of individuals traded through Christiansborg Castle are shocking. However, they are substantially less than the numbers of the people traded through many other centers on the Gold Coast. For example, over 115,000 people were traded through Cape Coast Castle. Of these individuals, about 15,000 perished at sea, and over 100,000 arrived at the first destination of the ship on which they were carried. Nearly 95,000 people were traded through Elmina Castle. Of these individuals, about 13,000 people perished at sea, and over 80,000 arrived at the ship's first destination. When in 1874, the Gold Coast was declared a British Crown colony, it was governed by Christiansborg Castle. It was governed from Christiansborg Castle. An image of the castle featured prominently on Gold Coast postage stamps, revealing a shocking lack of sensitivity on the part of the colonial rulers. For nearly 100 years, the castle, with its Union Jack flying over the white walls, was the symbol to Ghanaians of occupation by a foreign power. The horrors of slavery seemed to linger in the walls of the structure. Aden Clark, the last governor of the colony, woke one night to hear a persistent knocking in his bedroom. Although a down-to-earth man who did not believe in ghosts and the supernatural, he was unnerved and slept thereafter in a different room. After Ghana's freedom from British rule, Christiansborg Castle was renamed Government House, and Nkrumah's new government moved in. Only if the Ghanaian government reclaimed the former colonial edifice, Nkrumah believed, would the people of the nation grasp fully that the British were no longer in charge. Of all the acts symbolizing the transfer of power, observed a sympathetic British official at the time, none had more significance. The installation of the new government in the castle must have finally brought its home to Ghanaians, as nothing else could, that at long last, the foreigners had gone forever from the country. But the unease about the castle persisted. The cook and the steward were frightened to stay overnight and had to be accommodated outside. Nkrumah's devoted dog, which never left his side, woke his master one night with a piercing yelp. When Nkrumah put on the light, he saw that the dog was so terrified that its paw was standing on end. The dog refused to enter the room ever again. Today, the structure had been renamed Osu Castle. The new name no longer evokes the history of Denmark, but refers simply to the neighborhood of Accra, in which the castle is located. But still, it symbolizes the evil of the slave trade. From every corner, the aroma of blood, sweat, and breath, said Dorothy Hunting, an American civil rights campaigner who visited the castle in the late 1950s, does not escape the nostril of a sensitive soul, despite the fragrant flowers in the castle's well-kept garden. Ghana's independence shone a powerful spotlight on the tragic link between the US and Africa, the century-long history of the slave trade and slavery. This, coupled with Nkrumah's visionary language of Pan-Africanism, drew a number of African Americans to the country's shores. At the height of the civil rights movement, from the late 1950s to 1966, records recorded by Kevin Eke Gaines in American Africans in Ghana. Scores of African Americans went to Ghana, including intellectuals, technicians, teachers, artists, professionals, entrepreneurs, and then trade unionists. Ghana was a heaven, he adds, for a range of activists working at the intersection of anti-colonial, civil rights, leftist, and pacifist movements. Many of these expatriates, notes gains, were doubly estranged in the country in which they had been born. First, because their skin was black, and second, because they held political opinions that exceeded the limits of the Cold War American nation. Among the Americans who moved to Ghana after independence were political refugees, not unlike the South African freedom fighters driven into exile by apartheid. This included W.E.B. Du Bois, Shirley Graham, William Appius, and Dorothy Hunting, and Julian Mayfield, the novelist, actor, and journalist. The American writer and civil rights activist Maya Angelou, you know Maya now, Maya Angelou, arrived in 1962 and was full of praise. Ghana was flourishing, she wrote. Later, in All God's Children Need Traveling Shoes. People stopped in the streets, he recalled with pleasure, and said to passers-by, "Oh, but life is sweet. Oh, and the air is cool on my skin like fresh water." The shared joy, she said, was traceable to President Nkrumah. We shadowed Nkrumah's every move and read carefully his speeches, committing the more eloquent passage to memory, said Maya Angelou. Describing herself and other African Americans in Ghana as revolutionist returnees. He recorded how they danced the high life at Lido, throwing our hips from side to side as if we would have no further use for them. Or, she said, we will sit together, we will sit together over club beer, discussing how we could better serve Ghana, his revolution, and President Nkrumah. Angelou's book ends with a deeply moving account of her visiting to Keta, a Ghanaian village that had been hit hard by the slave trade. Some of the women she met in Keta markets were shocked to recognize Angelou as someone who resembled themselves. In her looks and even in the tone of her voice, they believed he was descended from their stolen mothers and fathers. They wept, seeing their history in her face. They mourned for their lost people. Maya Angelou wept with them. But she wept, she wrote, with a curious joy. Although separated from our languages, our families, and our customs, we had dared to continue to live. We had crossed the unknowable oceans in chains and had written its mysteries into deep river. My home is over Jordan, through the century of despair and dislocation. We had been creative because we faced down death by daring to hope. Again, that got me a little bit teary too. I'm not going to let that my tear drop. I'm not going to drop that tear in front of this camera, so I'm going to put that away. Now, what I'm saying here, what I'm trying to make you feel here is this. You have read about the history of slave trade. You have read about possibly the horror of it. But you also need, when you read history like this, accounts like this, you can actually relive the experience and imagine what that moment felt like. What it felt like for people that were condemned to nothingness, to slavery, because of the color of our skin. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of chapter 2. The chapter 2 of this reading. So we will go to chapter 3. I'm going to first have this tea break, and then we can digest what we have read so far. Thank you. Thank you so much for those of you who have joined and continue to share this. Okay. So remember, you can listen to this like a podcast, and you can still get on with your normal daily chores or job or work or whatever. Okay. So let's continue. Chapter 3. So we've done right now. We have done 26 pages. So 26 pages in 90 minutes. Do you think that's slow? Happy birthday to our one and only, by the way, Celia. Today is Celia's birthday. If she by any chance right here in the audience, you can help me wish her a happy birthday. Okay. So thank you so much. Remember, we may not be many, but the moment, the time you spend here is very crucial. If I'm going too fast, let me know. And if I'm going too slow, let me know as well. We have just about half an hour now, or let's say an hour max to go. And then, oh, hang on. It's actually like less than an hour to go. So let's get on to the chapter 3. So if you are watching me right now, if you have read the caption and description of this video, it will be easier for you to know what we are doing. We are going on to 520 something pages, and we just did 20 something of it. So we have we have about 500 pages to go. So now let's continue. Thank you very much. Yes, and everybody who is also here as well, you can give a big thank you to Totu as well. Yomi Totu, a member of the a Templar here, actually bought this for our own recitation. Okay, so say thank you to Totu as well. I can see he's here with us, which is great. So Celia, you would have to kind of find means of sending us our cakes, okay? Because a lot of us would love to. Maybe you have a virtual cake. I know. I don't know if you're going to go live, and then you'll be live, and then you have to eat cake, and all of us will just have to pretend we are eating cake with you. I don't know. Well, enjoy your day, okay? Enjoy it as you wake up to that today, okay? So let's continue. The challenge. Remember something, this one is telling you the connection of, the significance of Ghana's independence at the time. Ghana gaining independence in the world of that time was like a very big deal to all of the Black people on earth, especially African Americans, the Blacks in America. And that is something that, well, FBI, CIA, MI6, MI5, and the rest of them, they would have to do something. And indeed, they did something. That's why we are where we are today, by the way. So yeah, let's continue. The challenge of the Congo. Ghana achieved its liberation from British occupation in 1957. But Nkrumah believed that, hang on. I don't know, I could get emotional reading book. Like, do you even feel that? Like, could you get emotional just listening to me reading the... I don't know. I don't know, maybe because I put my heart into it anyway. I mean, can you even imagine? Right, let's continue now. So, they say Ghana achieved its liberation from British occupation in 1957. But Nkrumah believed that the freedom struggle had to embrace the whole of Africa, including those places where violence and rampant exploitation were still permitted and unchecked. One of the worst was the Congo. Here, hailed Kwame Nkrumah. The purpose of Belgian rule had been not to suppress slavery, but to change its nature, to make slavery more profitable by employing the slave in the Congo, and thus avoid the difficulties caused by the international abolition of the trade in its old-fashioned form. That this had been possible, he added, was due in large part to the imperial rivalry between the European powers. In 1884 and 1885, a conference was held in Berlin where the European powers partitioned Africa among themselves. The conference formalized the process known as the Scramble for Africa, in which nations including Britain, France, and Germany sought to colonize more and more African territory in order to acquire natural resources to feed their growing industries and also to build global markets for these industries. One outcome of the Berlin Conference, as it became known, was the awarding of the Congo to King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold II's first objective on possessing the Congo, declared many Belgians over subsequent years, was to suppress the slave trade. In 1778 alone, according to the 1959 Handbook of the Congo, published by the Belgian government, 104,000 slaves had been exported from Africa, of whom 1/3 came from the Congo and Angola. But from the 1885, Leopold II had owned the Congo as his personal possession, a territory that was bigger than all of the Western Europe and nearly 80 times the size of Belgium. He made a huge fortune out of this possession, known as the Congo Free State, without ever visiting it. Vast profits were generated from the forced labor of the Congolese in the collection of wild rubber and the killing of elephants for their tusks. Villages unwilling to unable to meet the assigned daily quotas were subject to rape, arson, bodily mutilation, and murder. Writes George Uzongola Ntalaja, a preeminent Congolese political scientist and professor of African and Global Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who has written seminal works on his nation's history. The lashing of people with a chicote, a whip made of sun-dried hippopotamus hide with razor-sharp edges, was widely practiced. 100 lashes of the chicote could be fatal. Records Adam Hochschild, the author of King Leopold's Ghost. Leopold II invited several hundred Protestant missionaries into the territory. Most of them made no protest, but some were appalled by the atrocities carried out by the force publique, Leopold's paramilitary army, and at the conditions in which the Congolese people were forced to live. These critics directed attention in America and Europe to the horrors they had seen. Africans whipped to death, rivers full of corpses, and a detail that quickly seared itself into the world's imagination: piles of severed hands. Each time the corporal goes out to get rubber, explained an American missionary in the Congo in 1899, cartridges were given to him. He must bring back all not used, and for everyone used, he must bring back a right hand. A state official informed me that in 6 months, the state on the Mompoyo River had used some 6,000 cartridges, which means that 6,000 people are killed or mutilated. In fact, he added, the number was more than 6,000, for he had been told repeatedly that soldiers killed children with the butts of their guns. Some regions of the Congo, said one observer, were veritable hells on earth. Hochschild's record records that in the 23 years of King Leopold's rule, an estimated 10 million people died as a consequence of brutality and executions. This amounted to about 50% of the population. Nzongola Otalaja notes that although this violence does not meet the specific definitions of genocide in international law as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, it resulted in a death toll of Holocaust proportions. The Congo Free State lasted until 1908, when Leopold was forced to cede control to the Belgian government. The transfer of power mitigated the very worst excesses of the treatment of the Congolese people. But it by no means ended their pitiless exploitation. Wow. The territory was open for business to entrepreneurs. One of these was the British industrialist, Lord Leverhulme, who created huge palm oil plantation in the region of North Kasai in 1911. Leverhulme was widely celebrated as a benefactor in Britain, but his philanthropic spirit was by no means manifest in the Congo, where he made his vast wealth. In Lord Leverhulme's Ghosts, Colonial Exploitation in the Congo, Jews, Marshall, shows in careful detail that Leverhulme set up his own private kingdom, reliant on the ruthless cruelty of the forced labor system. During World War II, Congolese workers were forced to labor at everything, from the railways to rubber plantations to the heavily guided uranium mine of Nkrumah, records Adam Hochschild. The mines producing raw materials for the Allies, he had worked day and night. Between 1938 and 1944, the workforce employed by Union Minière du Haut Katanga, a Belgian multinational, with huge mining interests in the province of Katanga, almost doubled, increasing from 25,000 to 49,000. So too did the number of fatal accidents at Union Mania plants. The injustice of Belgian occupation did not stop with the end of the war. Between 1946 and 1960, records, Jules Macha, possible recruitment continued. Those who failed to undertake the compulsory cultivation of crops were made to serve a prison sentence. The workers in the palm groves were treated abusively. In the push to produce palm oil product for the factories of the Lever brothers, the company founded by Leverhulme or Leverhulme. So Leverhulme is the founder of Lever brothers. Are you connecting the dots? These big French, American, European companies of that era, they were built on the back of Africans, slaving for them, the blood of Africans. And they dealt with us. Generational psychological destruction, Baba. They did us bad. Let's continue. In 1958, the Sureti, the security police, reported that a Belgian employee on a coffee plantation had tied a native suspected of stealing coffee behind his van and dragged him through the plantation. The whipping of Congolese people with a shikoti had been officially banned in 1951. It was still used and was legal in prisons. The Congolese workforce, whether it liked it or not, comments, Marshall, continue to be put at the disposal of European employers. The ruling Belgians carefully segregated the Congolese majority away from themselves in the capital city of Leopoldville, now Kinshasa. A neutral zone was established to separate the affluent district where the whites lived, known as Laval, from the Congolese townships, known as La Cite Indigène, or simply La Cite. The zone was originally planned as a cordon sanitaire, keeping the Congolese who were perceived as diseased and infectious away from the Belgians. The deeply racist structure was strengthened in 1930s. The physical separation, notes Unwana Mboka, an expert on the history of Kinshasa, was reinforced by regulation, a requirement that all Africans leave the European city at night unless they were an employee, that is, house help, or had a pass. Such lawful segregation, explicitly based on the color of a person's skin, was practiced widely in Africa at the time, in European colonies and in South Africa, forcefully demarcating the difference between people with black skin and people with white skin. Many Americans in the 1950s knew little about the Congo, or indeed about Africa generally, aside from Liberia, an American settlement created for black people, which declared its independence in 1847. The African continent had been seen as functioning within the European sphere of influence, with little relevance to the US. In fact, though Africa had been of central importance to the US in World War II, when Nazi Germany occupied North Africa in 1940, there was a fear that major part of Africa could be invaded, leading to subsequent attacks on the Brazilian coast. To prevent this, the US Navy, the US Army, constructed air bases in strategic areas of Africa. The Nazi occupation of North Africa was defeated, but most of the air bases remained. An Africa section was created in America's new intelligence service, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the forerunner of the Central Intelligence Agency. From OSS headquarters in Washington, the Africa section ran 3 field bases: Accra in the Gold Coast, Cape Town in South Africa, and Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. The OSS station in Accra, which was established in November 1942, served as the headquarters for 3 separate territories: the Gold Coast itself, the Republic of Liberia, and the Belgian Congo. The African section of the OSS grew rapidly. By the end of the war, it had placed a total of 93 agents in Africa, of whom 45 were covert personnel, 36 were semi-covert, and 12 were overt. The section was supported by the Research and Analysis Division, where Bonche worked as an analyst. One of the few black personnel in OSS, Bonche and William Boscombe, an anthropologist, wrote a packet guide to West Africa for military personnel, advising them to leave white American racial prejudices at home when they travel to Africa. The OSS station is the Belgian Congo. The OSS station in Belgian Congo had a unique top secret mission to protect the export of uranium from the Congo to America and to keep it out of enemies' hands. Congolese ore was essential for the Manhattan Project, which produced the world's first atomic weapons and was led by the United States, with some assistance from Britain and Canada. This uranium was used to build the first atomic bomb to be tested, the Trinity test in New Mexico in July 1945, which launched the atomic age. It was also used to build the atomic bombs that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki the following month, on 6th August and 9th August, respectively. The source of the ore was the Shinkolo-Bue mine in Katanga, the southern province of the Congo. Shinkolo-Bue produced uranium that was far richer than any other uranium in the world. It assayed as high as 75% uranium oxide, with an average 65%. By contrast, ores of marketable quality from the Colorado Plateau in the US and from Canada contained 0.1% uranium oxide, while ores derived from South African gold mines had a uranium oxide content on the order of 0.03%. The unique value of Shinkolo-Bue's uranium is straightforward, explains Lars Ostrom, professor of inorganic chemistry at Chalmers University in Gothenburg, Sweden. The reasons, he says, is simply that the higher the concentration of the desired element in an ore, the easier it is to extract. It is both about the chemical processes and processes that need to be developed and about the associated costs. A high concentration also means fewer other elements to separate it from. The Belgian Congo wrote, a senior chemical engineer involved in the work of the Manhattan project in 1943, to L.R. Groves, the director of the project, it says, the Belgian Congo offers natural resources of extreme importance to our domestic economy. Its known resources of uranium, which are the world's largest, are vital to the welfare of the United States. The correspondence noted, too, that in addition to uranium, the reserves of the copper, industrial diamonds, cobalt, and probably tantalite are among the world's largest. The report concluded definite steps should be taken to ensure access to the resources for the United States. The role of Congolese uranium in the Manhattan project was shrouded in secrecy. In order to deflect attention away from the Congo, attempts were made to sow the idea that the uranium used to build the first atomic bombs had been sourced from Canada. But some people knew better. One of these was Nkrumah's friend, George Padmore, who was aware of the activities of the Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, the Belgian multinational, which owned the Shinkolobwe mine. Only a few weeks after the tragedies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Padmore published an article titled, Africa Owes Key to Atomic Future. World's uranium supply is there. In the Chicago Defender, a newspaper serving the African American community. The uranium deposits in the Belgian Congo, he reported, are being closely guided by specially trained Congolese soldiers who supervise the native miners as they produce the uranium ores, the most valuable mineral in the whole world today. These miners, he added, with undisguised disapproval, received an average wage of 25 cents a day, plus rations and a hut provided by the company. Once they enter the mining compound, they are never allowed to return to their villages. The miners were vulnerable to many adverse health effects caused by uranium, explains Jen Bell, a Congolese nuclear physicist at MIT's Laboratory for Nuclear Science. He points to a spectrum of such effects, ranging from renal failure and diminished bone growth to damage to DNA. The effects of low-level radioactivity, he added, include cancer, shortening of life, and subtle changes in fertility or viability of offspring. He has determined from both animal studies and data on Hiroshima and Chernobyl survivors. The dust from the sites and the water used for dust control contain long-lived radioisotopes that spread into the surrounding areas. Low radioactive effects can be delayed for decades and are not detected in short-term toxicology studies. In the atmosphere, radon decays into the radioactive solid or solid polonium, bismuth, and lead, which enter water, crops, trees, soil, and animals, including humans. The possession of atomic weapons gave the US a unique global advantage in the early years of the Cold War. But in 1949, to the shock of the West, the Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb, and American President Harry S. Truman had to announce to the American public that the Soviets too had the bomb. The US was now even more determined to obtain all the Congolese uranium available and to prevent Soviet access to the Nkrumah mine. In 1951, the Office of the Special Assistant to the Secretary of State summarized efforts to maintain the security of the Belgian Congo. The Nkrumah mine, it stated, is of capital importance to the free world and was vulnerable to various security risks. There was a threat, it added, of Western Europe being overrun by the Soviets and a collaborationist Belgian government being established, which would attempt to cut off the United States from Congolese uranium. In such a case, it will be necessary to seize critical areas of the Belgian Congo by force. It was proposed that the director of the CIA, as soon as practicable, should initiate plans and preparations for covert counter-sabotage to improve military security of the Belgian Congo, and particularly that of the Nkrumah mine. Security around the mine and the adjacent processing plant was massively increased. It was a fortress that kept out Alain Guillaume-Brandt, an intrepid French explorer and writer. I am going to Elizabeth Fay. Now these names, man. The provincial capital of Katanga tomorrow. He wrote in the mid-1950s in Congo Noir et Blanc. But I will not go to Nkrumah, the forbidden holy city of the gods of combat. The US was hoping that South Africa would take over from the Belgian Congo as the leading supplier of uranium. This led to an alliance between America and apartheid South Africa, which is scrutinized by Thomas Bosterman, in apartheid's reluctant uncle. Official Washington observed Bosterman looked upon the white authorities, oppressive as they may have been, as the guarantors of that availability to the US government. Even a disciplined and peaceful black liberation struggle was a threat to American mineral access in South Africa. That is why they sent that's why they sent Mandela to jail. America, that's why America called Mandela a terrorist. It was because of their uranium. You follow? Good, let's continue. So the US was, okay, hang on. As it turned out, South African uranium ore was disappointing. But uranium was now being found in many other parts of the world. Furthermore, as the 1950s wore on, increasingly sophisticated methods of fission were deployed that were less dependent on the richness of the Nkrumah ore. Even so, the US continued to import large amounts of Congolese uranium. The American government financed two major capital investment programs at Nkrumah in the 1950s in order to expand the mine and develop the plants, right? So the first program was completed in 1953 rather. Arrangements for the second were made in 1956 and 1957. The total investment was close to $25 million. A secret agreement was reached in 1956 between the Combined Development Agency, a purchasing authority established by the US with the UK, and the African Metals Corporation, headquarters in New York, whereby uranium from the Belgian Congo will be provided until the end of 1959, possibly until the end of 1960. Nkrumah's uranium underpinned the value of the Congo to the US through the 1950s. However, it was not the sole reason. There were other valuable and strategic minerals in different regions of the territory. By 1959, about 9% of the world's copper, 49% of cobalt, rising to 54% in 1960, 69% of industrial diamond, and 6.5% of tin came from the Congo. It is the richest country in the world. It's also the poorest too, unfortunately. In addition to Africa's abundance of valuable minerals, many geographic areas of the continent were of strategic importance. There was a sense, said Frank C. Kalushi III, an American diplomat who worked in the US embassies in South Africa, the Congo and Zanzibar, and was appointed deputy director of the CIA in 1978, that Africa was becoming a major player on the world political scene, that the Cold War was extending its reach into Africa, and we needed to pay more attention to it. Cape Town, for example, played a crucial role in keeping open the Cape routes, which was seen as essential in order to defend NATO, the military alliance between North American and European countries, against Soviet incursion. American interests in the future are so great, said Nixon in 1957 to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as to justify us in not hesitating even to assist the departure of the colonial powers from Africa. In August 1958, a Bureau of African Affairs was created in the State Department. Joseph C. Satterthwaite, a career diplomat who had previously served as US ambassador to Sri Lanka and then Burma, was appointed the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs. In November 1959, a dedicated African division was created by the CIA in its Directorate of Plans, the branch of the agency that was responsible for clandestine operations and the recruitment of foreign agents. Bronson Tweedy, who had served as CIA Chief of Station in Vienna and then London, was its first chief. Kwame Nkrumah understood that the Congo was at the center of America's interest in Africa. He explained his reason in Challenge of the Congo, which was published in 1967. It is thick with factual detail and careful arguments. Choreographically, strategically, and politically, he wrote, the Congo is the most vital region of Africa. Military control of the Congo by any foreign power would give it easy access to most of the continent south of the Sahara. The region holds its importance, he argued, not only to its central position, but to its vast area and tremendous resources. He was aware of the importance of the Shinkolobwe mine, which he identified by name. He referred explicitly in his writings to the mining of Congolese uranium by Union Miniere and his role in the Manhattan Project in New York. Foreign powers, noted Nkrumah, clearly regard the Congo as the key to the military control of Africa. This was the significance he added. He added, of the aid which Belgium received from our allies to build great military bases in Ketona in the west and Kamina in the east of the Congo. This is the reason why there are 8 international airports, 30 principal, and over 100 secondary and local airports in the Congo. The Congo, he argued, was the buffer state between independent Africa in the north and the land beset by colonialism and white supremacy in the south. Northward stands free Africa determined, northward stands free Africa determined on a free continent. Southwards, Angola begins and stretches to the stronghold of colonial and racial oppression, the Republic of South Africa. The degree of the Congo's independence, Nkrumah declared, will substantially determine the ultimate fate of the whole continent of Africa. That is where I'm going to draw the curtain now. Let's see. Yeah, we've only got just about, I only have just about 10, 15 minutes to go. So I'm just going to stop there because that's the end of chapter 3. So we have chapter 4, Answer for Africa. So I've read this to you today. I have introduced you now to what is going to be our new reading time. And then we're going to start from chapter 4 the next time. So thank you so much for your patience and for being part of this. So to those who have shared or like and all that, I'm going to say thank you still, okay? Now you have the history there, okay? We all now kind of going to be reading a lot of this now so that every person, yourself included, and everyone who is watching this from any part of Africa as well, okay, you just need to have an idea of who we are and how they underdevelop this place and they tamper with our supposed progress and all that. So that if all of you get motivated enough and you find yourself in front of freedom fighting, liberation, self-determination and all this, okay, because the presence of this neocolonialism still exists in Africa, no doubt. But there are so many things that could be done. A generation could rise, a generation have to rise that knows better, that knows this history and are determined to kind of change the course of it. Just every small place you find yourself in these artificially created countries of Africa. The people that created us, that drawn all these lines and all of that, they didn't draw the lines because they love us. You know that. They drew all those lines because they wanted to keep us divided. And then they in control of what is most important to them. We are not the most important thing to these guys from the West. America, every one of them. No, we are not. So the most important thing to them is the resources they can find in any part of our land. They found them for a very long time, and they ensure that the successive governments in these artificially created countries of Africa, right? So all the successive governments that have ruled, they've ensured that they have ruled based on their dictates. The dictates of the colonial masters and the interested third parties and all that, to keep their people undereducated, to keep their people in poverty, and keep them to continue to be oppressed by looting and stealing from them. Do you get that now? So their role so far means that if you find yourself in any part of these African countries, you did not create them. Our ancestors didn't create them. They were created from a place called the Berlin Conference. We were shared as a property. And remember this and remember it all the time. Okay? So if you have a chance that you have all these neocolonialists who are running things in your different countries like we have them in Nigeria, this is the story to remind all of you that we deserve better. This is not our creation. These were created by some people who did not mean well for us, same people who took our ancestors on the different voyages. Many of them died, they never to be seen again. Those people who created that were those who created Africa, okay? They were those who demarcated Africa, those artificial borders. They drew them. They drawn all those artificial borders, right? So that is why if you have the remnant in any part of Africa, it is ideal to have a generation that will kind of do everything to ensure this does not continue. Get radicalized, get educated, prepare your mind, know better, and do better. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thank you so much, Michael. Ho. I'm going to see all of you later tonight. Let's go get ready for that. Good afternoon.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Maiyegun ti dé o ọ̀rẹ́ ara ìlú.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Lórí Facebook lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Gbogbo bó ṣe ń lọ ni Maiyegun já wa sí.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Àṣírí ọ̀jẹ̀lú kì í bò níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Bó bá ṣe eré àní Maiyegun máa wí.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Ó sì tún ṣe eré wàá gbọ́ níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Maiyegun diary politico.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Godfatherism kò sí lọ́rọ̀ Maiyegun.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Ẹ farabalẹ̀ sẹ́ o kẹgọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu o.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Àní Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé. Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Lórí Facebook.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Bọ́ bàbá gbé wúrẹ́.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ijó ìgbádìyẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Bí pẹ̀sìdó bá rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Bí gómìnà kówó jẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọlọ́pàá tí ń gba rìbá.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Aṣòfin tí ń rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Òpùrọ́ olóṣèlú.
Maiyegun máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran.
Wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ o, Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò fẹ́ bẹ̀. Wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀, Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò fẹ́ bẹ̀. Oníkan ṣáàtì ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, fáwọn ará ìlú tó gbé wọn débẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran.